Now let's take an example. Let's take the example of the balance sheet for John's taxi service. So here we see that we've marked this balance sheet and we've marked it John's taxi service. Again, this is for just a moment in time, and so we are going to put the date. Typically in a balance sheet, this would be the end of a period or the end of a month. So we'll say that this is the balance sheet for June 30, 2012. Now what this is going to show us for John's taxi service is over here on this side, it's going to show us our assets or what we have in John's taxi service. And over on this side, it's going to show us who owns it. Now in John's case, what happens is John has some cash that he can use to start this business. He has $3 million. John has $3 million in cash that he wants to use to start this business, and he has that cash in his own pocket, so he actually transfers that cash into the business. So over on this side we have assets, and we're going to list cash. Now on a balance sheet, the most liquid assets are usually listed first, and so cash is very liquid. And John has $3 million cash in his business. Now John at this point doesn't owe anybody anything. So when we put his liabilities over here, the liabilities are actually zero. And the owner's equity again, who owns these assets? Well, there's no liability, there's no other claim against it. So in this case, it's John. John has owner's equity of $3 million. Now we have to ask the question, this is a balance sheet, so do these two sides balance? When we take our assets and we total them down here, we come up with $3 million in assets, and when we come over here to liabilities plus owner's equity and we total that, what's our total? Well, of course, we have $3 million on this side. So these two sides equal each other. These two sides balance. So it is in fact in balance. So what we have here is a balance sheet showing us that John has taken $3 million, francs, euros, whatever the case may be, and he has invested it into his business. Probably not dollars, probably francs or something else, rupees or something in this situation. He's taken that, he's invested it into this business, and that is in cash, a cash asset of $3 million. Now John is just starting this business, and so it's not really an operating business yet, and he realizes that he needs to go buy a taxi. And he finds out that that taxi is going to cost him 4 million francs in this case, 4 million francs that he needs to buy this taxi. And in addition to this 4 million francs that he needs to buy the taxi, he also needs another million in working capital to keep the business going for a while. So he's going to need a total of 5 million. And so how does John get this 5 million? Well, in John's case, he actually goes to his Uncle Luke, and he says to his Uncle Luke, I'm starting this business, this is my plan. Uncle Luke thinks it's a great idea, and Uncle Luke agrees to give him a loan, a note for 2 million. So the question then becomes, how does this note of 2 million impact the balance sheet? So you'll remember over here we had assets and we had cash of how much? That's right, we had cash of 3 million. But now John has actually received an additional 2 million into his business from his Uncle Luke. So we have to take the 3 million that we had previous, and we have to, so let's say we had 3 million. We have to add the new amount, 2 million, and so now we have a total in cash of 5 million. So I would prefer to just write that in here as 5 million. So you see how we got that 5 million though in cash. And over on this side, we have liabilities. And under liabilities, we now have something because he does owe money. We have a note to Uncle Luke. And that note is now for 2 million. And we come down here to owner's equity. And we still have John and the 3 million that he invested originally in the business. So there's two sides balance. We have 5 million on this side, and on this side we have 2 million plus 3 million, also totaling 5 million. So now John has enough cash in the business to go out and buy a taxi. So that's actually what he does. He goes out and buys a taxi. And so we have another asset in the business now. We have this taxi, this automobile that he purchased. And he purchased it for 4 million. So we have a asset worth 4 million. And the cash remaining is how much? That's right, 1 million remaining in cash, and the total is still 5 million on this side. And over on this side we have total liabilities plus owner's equity of 5 million. It's still balancing. And so what we see here is this transaction that we've had where we have taken cash and purchased a taxi, and we have in the assets column now we have 1 million in cash and a taxi worth 4 million. And with that, John has what he needs to actually start this taxi business. He has the 1 million that he needed over here in cash that can be used for working capital, and the automobile, the taxi that he needed. So he gets started. And what John does is he operates for 3 months. And at the end of those 3 months, he has a loss of 200,000 from operations. He's operated the business at a loss, not a profit, a loss of 200,000 for those 3 months. But he's also been paying down the debt because he's been taking each month. He's been paying on that debt. He's been servicing the debt, principal and interest. And so he's paid off 250,000 of the loan. So let's show on the balance sheet how all of this impacts. So the first thing we need to do is realize that 3 months of time have passed. And so this is actually the September balance sheet. So we have 09/28/2012 for the September balance sheet. And it's going to show us what the cash situation is after these things have happened. He's been operating at a loss for 3 months, and he's been actually been paying down debt. So let's take these things one at a time. Let's account for the loss. So there was a loss of 200,000, and so let's account for that, and let's see how that impacts. And so over here we have our assets. And we have cash, and we have the taxi. Over here we have our liabilities, and we have the note to Uncle Luke, and we have our owner's equity, and we have John. And so I went ahead and filled in up here for Uncle Luke that note of 2 million and the equity down here, John's equity. Now his equity is what has been impacted by this loss. You'll remember he had 3 million in owner's equity, but that equity, the loss of 200,000 comes in from the income statement, also called a profit and loss statement, and we subtract it right off of here. And so he ends up with 2.8 million, or let me just write it out, 2,800,000 in owner's equity, and he still has that note that he owes. And over here we have cash. Well, that loss shows up in cash as well. So instead of having $1 million in cash, how much do we have now? That's right, 800,000 in cash. So I have this taxi that's worth $4 million. So when we do the math again, we see our total assets is now 4,800,000, and our total liabilities plus owner's equity also equals up to 4,800,000. Now we have accounted for, as we said, the loss of 200,000 from operations. I would like us, and I cleaned this up a little bit. Now I'd like to show what happened with the fact that he, over this 3-month period of time, has paid off 250,000 of his note to Uncle Luke. So let's show how that impacts the balance sheet. Now it's not going to really have any impact over here on the assets side because the cash is still 800,000, the taxi is still 400,000. But over here on this side we see that he has paid off 250,000 that he owed his Uncle Luke, and so that brings his new total that he owes to 1,750,000. But now the balance sheet isn't balancing anymore. We have 4.8 million over on this side, and on this side we have we've just reduced this, so the total would be wrong. Well, what do? Well, what happened is when he paid off this portion of the note, that 250,000, what happened is that increased his owner's equity by 250,000. So now his owner's equity actually becomes 3 million. I'll write it at an angle here. 3,050,000. And so when you take this plus this, we're still in balance with a total of 4,800,000. And you can see what actually happened is his owner's equity increased from 2.8 to this by paying off that note. Now let's imagine that John actually operates for 3 more months, and during that period of time he actually turns profitable. So he goes from having a loss in the first 3 months to actually having a profit in the next 3 months, and a profit of 100,000. And let's see how that profitability of 100,000 impacts this balance sheet. So 3 months has passed, and one of the first things we need to do is change the date up here. So that brings us to the end of the year, 12/31/2012, and so we need to record that. And you'll remember that last time, we had some changes from his loss, and so the liabilities changed, and it was 1,750,000, and his equity changed also. That you'll remember that was 3,050,000. Okay, and so the balance sheet was in balance. But then we have the next 3 months of operation come, and there's actually a gain. Instead of a loss, there's income, there's profitability of 100,000. And so how does that impact the balance sheet? Well, the way that impacts the balance sheet is that over here, that 100,000. Let me change colors here. That 100,000 comes in here and gets added to John's equity. So he goes up in equity to 3,150,000. Let me fix that. 3,150,000 in equity. And it's a balance sheet. So you remember these two sides have to balance. So the question is, what impact does that profitability of 100,000 have on this side? Well, the value of the taxi doesn't change, and so we need to add it over here. So what happens is that 800,000 becomes 900,000 when we add the 100,000 in profitability. And so now over here, if we did our total, we'd be at 4.9 million. And over here, when we do our total, we find that also we are at 4.9 million. And so the balance sheet is balanced as a result of the gain of 100,000. Now we showed what result the gain of 100,000 had on December's balance sheet. Now let's take a look and see what would happen if we calculate the fact that for these 3 months he's also been paying off this debt to his Uncle Luke, so we have to adjust that again. And so we say that he paid down another 250,000 of debt to Uncle Luke. So the impact of that is shown here. We subtract 250,000, giving us the note now has reduced to a note of 1.5 million. Okay, but again, this is a balance sheet. On this side we have 4.9 million. So we're going to need to have the same thing on this side. So what do? Well, we take that same 250,000, because he's paid that down. That's become part of John's equity. And so now over here, this is 3,400,000 at the end of December. And so when we do our math and add up this side as well, we come up to 4.9 million on this side as well. And so the balance sheet is in balance. And that brings us to a conclusion of our discussion of the balance sheet and the impact that various financial transactions over time have on the balance sheet. And again, important things to remember: a balance sheet is a snapshot. It shows us a particular moment in time. And one of the most important functions of the balance sheet is it tells us over here on this side what we have, and on this side, between the liabilities and owner's equity, who owns it.